You're listening to Soul Food with North Shore Church. Challenges are happening all around us, but they're also happening inside of our souls. In each episode of Soul Food, we will dive into the needs and longings of our souls. That way, we can experience God's healing in every aspect of our lives. Thanks for joining us. Now it's time to feed your soul. Here are your hosts, Scruggs and Sue Dils.
Well, I want to welcome everybody to our first episode of this new podcast we're doing here at North Shore called Soul Food. And I am joined by the wise, brilliant, esteemed Sue Dils, who is the director of our support and recovery ministry, Recovery and Support. And this is something I am really excited about, Sue, because as the title indicates, what we want to do is just have conversations about what's going to be good, healthy, fulfilling for our souls. If you look through the Bible, the writers of Scripture will use that word soul to describe what I would call maybe the most vulnerable part of the human life. There's great language in Psalm, in one of the Psalms that says, my soul thirsts for God. And there's another Psalm that says, my soul grows weak because it needs God. And all that to me says that in life, we're going through the motions of our daily lives, our personal lives, our professional lives, family, relationships, stress, job, finances. And yet, amidst doing all that stuff, inside of me, there is a soul that God created and loves, and it needs God desperately. And here's the other thing that goes with why we're doing this. Most people don't know how to care for their soul.
Totally.
They don't know how to take care of it, nonetheless what it may be, right? So to be jumping into this conversation, Sue, I think you bring just incredible wisdom, and we're going to talk about some of that today around how to care for my soul. How do we do self-care? Like, how do we manage the part inside of me that's going to come out of me under stress or in all sorts of ways that I can't control? So how do I grow in that? And I just want to say as we get started, the reason for this, the why, because it's really important for those of you listening right now that you would understand, why are we talking about this? Why should I give 20 minutes to this conversation? Well, here's why. It's because people matter.
Yeah.
And for you listening right now, it's because you matter. And for me speaking right now, it's because I matter, right? And part of what I want us to dig into even today is it can be hard to even name the fact that I matter, I have needs, they need to be cared for. How do I go about all that? And so I want to just transition to you, Sue, and say, tell us a little bit about what we're talking about today, what you want to share, and what that has to do with how we care for ourselves, how we care for our souls.
I used to really confuse selfishness with self-care, because I thought that actually doing care of my soul meant I was being selfish. And so I wonder if for the listeners it'd be really helpful to contrast those two things. I think that selfishness has to do with getting something at the expense of another person, or trying to satisfy a pleasure at the extent of someone else. Self-care, though, has the idea of refueling or replenishment in order that we can give out to others. And it's this idea of a rocket ship or fuel in a rocket, where if we've used up too much fuel, our rocket actually is jettisoned and then enters this free fall. And there's nothing left to propel it. And if you take that example and think of us as humans, when we've used up everything inside, we can no longer serve. We can no longer focus on others around us. We've used up everything inside. And so to be good stewards of our soul, we have to be interested in self-care. It's just an essential.
Yeah. And another analogy that makes me think of is, and most of you listening will know this, it's when you sit down on the airplane and they say, if we were to by chance lose, pressure in the cabin, which of course inside I start to panic when I hear that line, no matter what was going on. If the oxygen mask will drop down, put your mask on first.
Right.
And there is something that gets deep into the way I think Christianity is taught or understood by people, where they'll assume the Christian thing to do is to run around the plane putting masks on. It doesn't matter about my own.
Right.
And not knowing that if I were to try that, I would pass out before I got anybody else's mask on. And if you look at the life of Jesus, one of the things people often miss and all of the work he did that was sacrificial for others, he would do things that showed radical soul care and self-care.
Yes.
Walking away from needs.
Right.
How dare he?
Right.
There's still people to heal here. Why are you leaving town?
Yeah.
Getting away by himself. Right now, my life with God is more important than anything else that's on my plate to do, that he would make those kind of decisions. And so I think it's something that in some ways we avoid, miss, and in a way, I think I, as a pastor, can be liable for almost kind of driving people to more of that at times by saying you got to serve, you got to do all these things.
Right.
But right now, we really want to lean into and say, what does it look like for me to look at my own needs, name them, honor them, say that they're there, and then I don't even know what they are.
Right.
I mean, how do you speak to that?
Well, that's such a great question. I think I would ask myself, or our audience can ask themselves, which one of these three resonates with you? Is it, I have no needs? Is it, I shouldn't have needs? Or is it, my needs are less important than someone else's? And to be really honest, I've struggled in all three of these.
Say those again, just so everyone can kind of
Sure.
absorb those are profound questions to kind of, and everybody listening, you got to figure out, what am I, a 1, a 2, or a 3? So
Exactly, or all of the above.
that's right.
I have no needs, I shouldn't have needs, or my needs are less important than someone else's. And all three of those are dismissive of our needs. None of those are right because we're all designed to need, and we all do currently have needs. So we need to acknowledge the reality of that.
Yeah. The soul is a needy thing. And again, I think in my life, and this goes back to, just being challenged as a young person to succeed and go after it. And, there's just something in our human nature that longs to be on top of situations, to manage them well, to be on top of life, to be in control. It's hard to go, I have this need.
Right. It's a really vulnerable place.
It is.
And I think sometimes we move automatically to being ashamed of our needs somehow, and yet there's nothing to be ashamed of. We all have needs.
Well, let's unpack that, because I actually think that's where so many people get stuck. Why do you think, is it just cultural pressures? Is it family of origin stuff? Like, why is it that it's so hard? Because I imagine people are hearing this going, oh yeah, that sounds right. But then we walk out of the room and we can't do it. So why, in your experience with people, why is it that it's such a barrier for people to get over, to be able to just say, I have these real important needs?
I think a big part of it is we're afraid of being harmed. So we're self-protective, so we kind of build a wall around us in order to prevent us from being hurt or harmed by someone. And sometimes we can have a background where we were actually harmed, which makes it harder for us to walk into the future anticipating that actually somebody could handle us really well and not harm us when we reveal a deeper part of our heart. And yet God designed us to be vulnerable, both with Him and with others in the community of Christ.
Yeah. You're now speaking it into my language, that sense of like there's fear.
Right.
And alongside that fear, there's experience that reinforces that fear.
Totally.
And
I grew up that way too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give you 10 seconds to answer this, but how do we get over our fears? Go. I'm just kidding.
You start to practice with a safe person.
Yeah.
Yeah. Find somebody who doesn't gossip, who doesn't give you a ton of advice, who doesn't preach at you and just hears your heart. And I think the more we find people like that, the more we've experienced that someone else can offer us good and rich things like comfort and affirmation and acceptance. And all those things our heart needs, they're like these vitamins. And if we find people like that and we hang out with them, our heart is going to get fuller and we start to kind of let that fear go away. And it's wonderful. It frees us up, actually.
Yeah. I think in addition, or alongside that maybe is the right phrase, because I've experienced this in my own life. Part of that's just being in ministry. And so there's a goodness to wanting to serve and help and lead well. And it can also be like really tempting. I mean, really tempting. And those of you who are in forms of leadership out in your life, you know this, to say, well, now that I'm in leadership or have influence or I'm seen as an authority figure, I got to button up those needs, kind of tidy them over in the corner.
Right.
And of course, that's part of why we see in our world just train wrecks happen, and we're so surprised by it. That person seemed like they were doing so well.
Yeah.
And
Those are actually the people you probably have to worry about.
So, are you looking at me right now? Maybe so, right? But beside that is to say, so along the way, there's all these little decisions. It's not a big. No one sets out going, I'm just going to have a total burnout. Like, I'd love to just nuke my life. Like, where do I sign up for that? Like, no one's doing that.
No.
It's these tiny little decisions, these little fork in the road moments where we say, I could reach out and have a conversation about that, or I'll keep it to myself.
Yeah.
I could name that's a real need, or I could just say, no, I can get over that. I'm going to be strong and not process that with anybody. And one of the things that's been real important in my own journey has just been working with a counselor, which I've done on and off since I was about 30 years old, and realizing that partially because of how I'm wired and who I am, being predisposed to anxiety and a lot of performance, anxiety kind of stuff in terms of like I want to be the best at everything and all the stuff that goes with that, but also just being in ministry and leadership, to be able to have conversations where I can process, here's what I'm going through safely.
Right.
And then alongside that, who are the safe people to do that with? It's been really interesting in my marriage and for Nina and I to talk through moments where it feels like, gosh, we're having a struggle or conflict. And then what comes out of the conversation is one of us it's not that the other person let the other person down. Like, it's not that at the end of the day, it wasn't me letting her down, although I do that plenty. It was, are you taking care of your needs?
Right.
Like, are you able to take care of you right now? Because if I'm not doing that for me, if I'm not taking the time or the space to refuel, get care, process, then I actually can't bring the right stuff to her. And I just think that's become so normal, again, and maybe because we just get used to it. It's just normal for people.
I think so. And I think one thing I've learned that's super helpful, and I'm just learning this, is to go into my closer relationships and actually ask for what I need. So maybe I had an experience this last week where I had an encounter with somebody that just shook me inside, and I felt very needy, very much in need of affirmation and acceptance. And so I went to my husband and I said, I'm going to tell you about this situation. I don't need your advice, but I really need you to hear my heart, and I need some comfort right now because I'm feeling really shaken. And he was able to enter into that and offer me wonderful words that just helped soothe what I was going through. And I think if we can voice to one another what we actually need, we can find that with people who are really attuning to us, who are, reading us well. And it was such a gift. It was like my heart felt heard. And when you think about self-care and you're looking at replenishing the fuel in your tank, that's a big part of it, is are there people in my life that are sort of giving me something that I need right now because I'm struggling, and it's using up a ton of energy as I process this hard thing that I've just encountered. I know when we talked with the staff a few weeks ago, we talked about this quote by a friend of mine, Laura Mae Gardner, where she said that, sharing the burden or the yoke, if you bear the yoke yourself, it's like best case scenario is it's ripping you up. Worst case scenario, it becomes intolerable. And yet, I know I've lived part of my life where I didn't share my yoke, and it was miserable. So if we can find those relationships where we can start to share those things that are really heavy and hard for us, it puts fuel in our tank. And there's lots of other ways we can refuel, but that's one really important way.
Yeah, you've talked about those other ways. So I know there's numerous ones, but what would you say are maybe some of the most important ways that we can refuel, get that oxygen mask on, And again, if we're talking about self-care, it's very equated with just being aware of my needs and being proactive about that. So what are the ways that we can be aware of our needs and be proactive about it?
Totally. So I think one real important one is just giving up this sense that we need to control everything in our life.
But Sue, I love that.
So have I. So have I. But it's exhausting.
It is.
Yeah. I think we're kind of giving up that life has to look perfect, that all relationships need to work perfectly, that my son needs to behave a certain way. And I'm not saying we give up common sense, but I am saying we've got to give up this need to control and package life, especially right now when there isn't a lot of normalcy to life.
Yeah.
So actually taking that off the plate automatically gives fuel and energy.
Yeah. My life shouldn't always be Instagrammable, right?
Totally.
It doesn't need to go that way. And
Yeah.
so that's wonderful.
Yep, exactly. And I think you can still be busy and still have a lot of fun and thrive in life without trying to control and manage every single detail. So that would be one way to replenish. I think setting limits and learning how to say no is also really important. Some of us are boundaryless, and so we say yes to everything. We serve in every capacity. Any request made of us, we say yes to, and we need to exercise our no muscle because we have just so much energy to give to life today. So we're being thoughtful and we're being discerning by sort of selecting what are the highest priorities for me today. And in light of that, what do I say no to? So another good one. I think another thing is and you kind of mentioned this or alluded to it, but it's addressing what hurts. And so if we have already been struggling with depression, or if we have a hidden addiction, or if we are highly anxious, or perhaps before COVID hit, we were struggling with those and now it's even worse, we need to be moving toward care for our souls. And that may mean a counselor, somebody who sees better than we can see. Somebody who's there with heart, who can help us sort of till that soil and begin to address it, because that uses up huge amounts of energy.
Yeah, I just want to kind of press on that a little bit, and for all of you listening and hear this as someone in pastoral leadership and with a platform of leadership to say, I need my counselor. Mm-hmm. And it is, I love that phrase, they can see better than you see. And I know I've heard, hard stories of being with a counselor that wasn't a good fit, or wasn't, there's chemistry that's important there,
Sure,
I suppose.
sure.
But to be able to say, I'm going to sit with someone who has no other agenda other than to help me unpack what's going on and help kind of walk beside me towards care.
Yeah.
Walk beside me towards what would look like healing.
Yep.
It's actually quite pastoral. And in many ways, people in my chair in ministry don't have the time or training, even credentialing, to be able to walk that road with people as needed. And so I would just say, I was telling a friend about this recently, who's kind of on the fence saying, gosh, it feels kind of like a badge of shame, or like I'm really messed up or I'm really broken to make a phone call like that. I said, no, it actually may be the healthiest thing about you.
Yeah.
And it's what's broken in us that actually keeps us from picking up the phone.
That's right.
Keeps us from making that. So that's a hugely important thing. I also want to just say, I think you mentioned just that word hurt. And I think that's especially in the season we've just come through. And I know you've used the word loss a bit, and there's been a lot of those losses. But beside that word and beneath that word, and maybe what makes that word run even deeper for me, is that word hurt. Because it's like, oh yeah, there's pain in this.
Yeah.
There's pain from this year. Mm-hmm. And it's accrued pain. It's maybe happened because of how I've been living, or relationships that have gotten frayed or strained or harder, or actions or regrets. But it's like all that isn't just, I think in the Christian world we use the word sin, and it is that. That's that sense of it's not what God wants. But we don't often talk about how sin by definition creates pain and hurt. That is what it does. There is no sin that doesn't create that somewhere in some place. And as human beings with a soul, man, you can't live with just hurt unchecked. It's just slow, like your soul can bleed out. Your body bleeds out and you die. But if your soul's bleeding out, you may not know it. but you can have almost like a deadened, calloused soul walking around, and lots of people are there right now, especially given what we walk through. So just say a little bit about like that part of leaning in or looking out or going after the hurts that are there.
Well, I think you're taking your own temperature, right? So you're kind of noting yourself. I've been particularly burdened for parents and teachers and first responders and counselors and caregivers. I'm probably forgetting a category, but you think about how overwhelmed people are feeling these days and that they're carrying around hurt they may not be voicing. So when it comes to us just kind of taking a moment to honor what is going on inside of me right now and taking your temperature, and is it I'm really affected by the loss of X, Y, or Z, and have I thought about how that's impacting my mood, my energy level? I mean, I am exhausted, I am bleeding out. So it's the self-awareness of what is going on inside of us that can help inform us as to where we go to get some help. Where do we go to get some fuel? I love that God has resources ready for us, but often shame gets in the way. So we feel like I shouldn't be struggling, I shouldn't be burned out, I should have more energy, and all those shoulds are not the truth. We do have energy that gets used up. And sometimes it's we need more people around us that are speaking into our life, sharing our burdens, and sometimes it's a counselor. It's somebody who can get under there and just help us begin to heal so that that part of our lives doesn't have such a drain. I think also we've talked about just losses, and we talked about this in November 15th when we did this sermon, that those losses would be very easy for us to just make a list of and go, yeah, I had all these losses, and then walk away. But have we actually been intentional in setting aside a sacred time where we have grieved? So maybe it's like you take 2 or 3 or 5 minutes and you journal. This was really hard for me, having to give up a part of my job and being home to homeschool my kids. You light a candle, you talk to Jesus about those things, you shed a tear or you get angry, and you pray, and then you close out that time by blowing out the candle and taking a walk or putting on some worship music. You have handled something with sacred hands that has been a burden to your heart that you've been carrying. And I think we deserve to honor our losses in that way, because then we notice them and our heart is looking for us to pay attention to those things. Otherwise, we drag this weight of loss with us into each day, and we're feeling it. Our attitude or our mood is a bit depressed just because we're carrying so many losses.
Oh my goodness, that gives the Holy Spirit a chance to work, right? In that moment where you set that time aside, for God to step in and be with you. Because of course, if you look at the life of Jesus, he was constantly like invading people's hurt space.
Yes.
And I mean that word in a sense that he took initiative to kind of say, that's where I'm going to go.
Yeah.
And just that image or that practice you shared, I hope you were all listening to think about, like, you can make that list at home. You can actually set aside those times and have those moments and ask God to be with you, whether you have to cry or get angry. And it may be a lot of hurt. Maybe it's not, a candle, maybe a bag of, one of those big bag of tea lights. I don't know what it is, but you might have a lot to go through, but that's okay. Because part of what you're saying is, for my soul, for the needs to be met, this vulnerable, intimate, treasured part of me, for the needs there to be met by God, I've got to name that they're there and go through that process of saying, now that I feel it, I'm just going to put it out there as what is. I think of, that story of Jesus going to see his friend Lazarus after he had passed away, and Mary and Martha both sharing very honestly, this is what we lost. If you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. He said that was her naming that hurt. That was, there wasn't maybe not a candle that moment. That was her like listing that out and taking space for it and saying that's where God grieves with us. And that's a great line in that story. I haven't thought about it this way until just now. A great line of the story is it's in that moment when he's crying with them and she said the hard word and all the mess is happening that feels very out of control and messy. And there's this great line in the scripture, Sue, where the people watching say, see how he loved him. Oh. And then I think it's actually in those moments when I'm at my vulnerable, broken, I've got these needs, I've got this pain, I'm hurting, that the love of God gets unearthed. And we encounter this radical, amazing truth that it's in the midst of all that pain, I'm still loved, I'm still valued. Even if there's shame out there, God doesn't shame me.
No.
And there is nothing I can bring to him that will shame me. That's just what the cross has taken care of. Mm-hmm. And I think, especially in this day, given all we've gone through this year, we think about COVID, the elections, the political division, the unrest in the country, the blame and the spirit of hostility and contempt that's just everywhere. And most likely behind that is a society, a collection, a nation of people in incredible grief.
Right.
Carrying these just intense hurt. Mm-hmm. And so for the church to be the church, what do we offer? If we're all carrying around the same bag of hurt and wielding the same finger pointing, with the same kind of blame, it doesn't matter if we have a Christianized version of carrying your bag of shame. It's got to be a version that actually begins with healing.
That's right.
And I think part of what I think I want to wrap us with today and leave all of you who are listening with today is you can be healed. There is healing and hope as possible, but you got to back up and say, that's not going to be just a quick, easy, intellectual process. It actually goes way down to the soul and the needs your soul has right now. And I think there's a lot of people, Sue, right now who are thinking, I have no needs, I shouldn't have needs, my needs are less important than others. And so today might be the day where you say, that's not where I'm going to be. I'm going to start with I have needs. And then my challenge to all of you who are listening right now is, what's your next step? Like, what's the step you want to take? And that could be reaching out to a friend, a safe person, like you said. It could be calling someone here at North Shore. It could be reaching out for a counselor or a referral to one. It could be taking that moment to set up time to grieve and pray and process. It's not that there's a wrong. It's that there needs to be, I think, this intentional leaning in and saying, I have to do something different to break this cycle of feeling the hurt, ignoring the hurt, and then hurting more.
Right.
And then that just snowballs and gets worse. And then it goes back to the rocket, running out of fuel to the point where we just experience some kind of burnout.
Yeah.
And we just feel like, I've heard so many people, Sue, in this season say, I just feel like I'm done.
Yeah.
But they got to get up the next day.
That's right.
And they got to go to work and care for their family or whatever God has on their plate. And I just think that message of no, you don't have to just keep going. You've got to go back to those needs. And that's where I think soul care and self-care really can come alive.
And that's where we thrive, right? When we've refueled, that allows us to actually not just survive, but we begin to thrive because we have an abundance inside that allows us to give out. And when we're too tanked, it's really difficult to love or to be other-focused. Yeah.
That's so good. And I think that is an amazing last word, so we're going to leave it at that. Thank you for joining us for this episode 1 of Soul Food. And we wish you all the best in this holiday season and with all that you're carrying. And we love you, and we will see you next time.
And Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
This has been Soul Food with North Shore Church. We're thrilled that you tuned into our show. Until next time, you can find us online at northshore.church or say hi on social media at North Shore Church on Instagram or North Shore Community on Facebook. We would love to hear from you.